Hello there, and welcome to this special journey through time. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from right now. Are you tucked into bed as the sun sets? Perhaps it's already deep into the night where you are. Or maybe dawn is just beginning to break outside your window. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, you're welcome here. Tonight, we're going to explore something fascinating. Something beautiful and terrible all at once. We're going to step into the lives of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. But not the pharaohs you might think you know. Not the gleaming golden figures from movies and museum displays. No. Tonight we're going to discover the disturbing reality behind those magnificent masks. If you enjoy this kind of relaxing, educational content, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to the channel. And if you find yourself drifting peacefully towards sleep as we journey together, well, that's exactly what this is for. Now, take a deep breath with me. Let it out slowly. Good. Let's begin. Imagine, if you will, a cage made of gold. The bars are so beautifully crafted, so perfectly polished, that they catch the light and throw it back in dazzling patterns across the walls. The cage is enormous. It has many rooms, gardens with fountains, chambers filled with treasures beyond counting, servants who attend to your every need. But it's still a cage, and you can never, ever leave. This was the life of a pharaoh, a life that looked like paradise from the outside, a life that others would kill for. For Khan. Sacrifice everything to obtain. But from the inside, it was something else entirely. It was a golden prison, and the pharaohs were its most magnificent prisoners. Let me take you back. Way back, over 3,000 years back in time. Picture a land of contrasts so extreme they seem impossible. On one side, the richest river on earth, the Nile, cutting through the landscape like a vein of pure life. Its waters are dark and cool. Its banks are thick with green, growing things, papyrus reeds taller than a man, date palms heavy with fruit, fields of wheat and barley that stretch as far as the eye can see. But step away from that river, just a few miles in either direction, and you find yourself in another world entirely. A world of sand. Endless sand. Golden dunes that roll like frozen waves toward every horizon. The heat here is crushing. The silence is absolute. Nothing grows. Nothing lives. It's beautiful in its own way. This desert, beautiful and utterly merciless. And right there, right at the edge where the living green meets the lifeless gold, that's where they built it. Ancient Egypt, one of the most remarkable civilizations in human history. For 3,000 years, it endured. Think about that for a moment. 3,000 years. That's longer than Christianity has existed. That's longer than the United States has been a country by. Oh, about 2,700 years or so. It's a span of time so vast that the ancient Egyptians themselves looked back on their own ancient history with the same wonder we feel looking back at them. During those 3,000 years, the Egyptians achieved things that still seem impossible today. They built the pyramids. Of course, mountains of stone raised by human will alone. The Great Pyramid of Giza stood as the tallest man-made structure on Earth for over 3,800 years. 3,800 years. We've never built anything that held that record for even a fraction of that time. They developed one of the world's first writing systems. Those beautiful, mysterious hieroglyphics that look more like art than alphabet. Sacred writings carved into stone to last forever. They created a calendar with 365 days, tracking the movements of the sun and stars with uncanny precision. They knew exactly when the Nile would flood each year, down to the day. That knowledge meant survival. It meant civilization. They performed the world's first brain surgery. They had medical knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe for thousands of years. They understood astronomy, mathematics, engineering, art, literature. They were, by any measure, brilliant. But here's something interesting. Something that tells you a lot about ancient Egypt if you stop to think about it. Their most impressive monuments. The structures they spent the most time on, poured the most resources into, designed with the most care. They were tombs, houses for the dead. All that brilliance, all that wealth, all that human effort, focused on one thing above all else: death. And what comes after? At the center of this death-obsessed civilization stood the pharaoh. Not a king. Exactly. Though we often use that word. Something more, something stranger. The pharaoh was a living god. Not a person chosen by God. Not a person blessed by God. The pharaoh was God. The god Horus in human form. Walking the earth. The son of Ra. The sun itself. If you lived in ancient Egypt and you saw your pharaoh, you didn't just bow. You fell flat on your face. You averted your eyes. You didn't speak unless spoken to. Because you weren't in the presence of a person, you were in the presence of the divine made flesh. In America, we have this idea that all people are created equal. It's right there in the Declaration of Independence. It's foundational to how we think about ourselves and our society. The president is just a person, elected by other people, who can be criticized, questioned, even removed from office. But imagine if George Washington had been worshipped as an actual god. Imagine if every president after him claimed to be his literal divine child. Imagine if questioning the president's decisions was considered not just treason, but blasphemy against the universe itself. That was Egypt. And being that god, being that pharaoh, it was the most powerful position imaginable, and the most imprisoning. Think about what it means to be divine. Gods don't have bad days. Gods don't make mistakes. Gods don't feel fear or doubt or loneliness. Gods don't get sick. Gods don't age. Gods don't have petty thoughts or selfish desires or moments of weakness. Gods are perfect. Always. Now imagine being a human being who has to pretend to be that. Not for an hour. Not for a day. But for your entire life. From the moment you're old enough to understand what you are, until the moment you die. Every action you take has cosmic significance. Every word you speak carries divine weight. Every ritual you perform keeps the universe in balance. If you forget the words to a prayer, the Nile might not flood. If you face the wrong direction during a ceremony, the sun might not rise. If you show weakness, fear, humanity, the entire nation might collapse into chaos. At least, that's what everyone believes. What you're raised to believe. What you must make yourself believe. Because if you don't, if you start thinking of yourself as just a person, then what are you? What have you become? A fraud. A failure. The thing that will bring ruin to everyone and everything. So you can never stop performing. Never stop being God. Not even in your own head. The pharaoh lived in a palace. Of course, a palace so large it was like a small city. But he couldn't wander freely through it. Everywhere he went, he was accompanied by servants, guards, priests, officials, people watching, always watching, observing every gesture, every expression, looking for signs, omens, meanings. He couldn't choose his own clothes. Each garment had religious significance, had to be put on in a specific order, in a specific way. He couldn't eat what he wanted. His food was chosen for him, prepared according to sacred recipes, tested for poison, offered to gods before it ever reached his lips. He couldn't befriend anyone. Not really. Because how can you be friends with someone who falls on their face when you enter a room? Someone who believes you control whether or not the sun rises tomorrow. Someone who wants something from you. Always. Even if it's just to not be killed on a whim, and he couldn't escape. Not into sleep. Because even dreams were considered sacred visions. Not into privacy. Because privacy didn't exist for a god. Not into death. Because death for a pharaoh was just the beginning of a whole new set of obligations. The golden cage. Beautiful. Ornate. Absolutely inescapable. Now, you might be thinking, surely it wasn't all bad. Surely there were perks. The wealth, the power, the luxury. And yes, those things existed. The pharaohs had access to treasures that would make modern billionaires weep with envy. They commanded armies. They built monuments. They had hundreds of servants whose entire existence revolved around their comfort. But here's where things start to get disturbing. Because when you give one human being that much power over others, when you tell that person they're literally divine, when you remove every check, every balance, every consequence to their actions, something happens. Sometimes, that person tries desperately to be good, to be worthy, to live up to the impossible standard. And sometimes, that person becomes something else, something darker. Some pharaohs married their own sisters, their daughters, their mothers. They did this believing it kept their divine bloodline pure. But the result was genetic disaster. Children born twisted, sick, in pain. Some pharaohs had hundreds of servants killed and buried with them, believing these people would continue to serve in the afterlife. Imagine being chosen for that honor. Imagine the night before, knowing what the next day would bring. Some pharaohs became so paranoid, so convinced that everyone around them was plotting their death, which often they were, that they trusted no one. Slept in different rooms each night. Had food tasters? Had their own family members executed on suspicion alone. Some pharaohs poured the entire nation's resources into building their own tombs, monuments to themselves, stairways to heaven made of stone and the broken bodies of thousands of workers. And some pharaohs tried to change everything, to break free of the system, to be something other than what they were born to be. And they paid for it. Over the next hour or so, we're going to meet some of these pharaohs. We'll meet Hatshepsut, the woman who declared herself king and ruled better than most men, only to have her successor try to erase her from history entirely. We'll meet Akhenaten, who decided there was only one God, the sun disk, and that he alone could speak to it. His own people called him the heretic, the criminal. His city was abandoned. His name was struck from every record. But we still remember him, still wonder about him. We'll meet Tutankhamun, the boy king who became the most famous pharaoh of all time, not because of anything he did in life, but because his tomb survived intact. Because we can look at his golden mask and see, really see, the face of a god. We'll meet Ramesses II, who ruled for 66 years, fathered over 100 children, and built so many monuments to himself that you can barely visit an ancient Egyptian site without seeing his name carved into stone. And we'll meet Cleopatra, the last pharaoh, the one who spoke 9 languages, seduced Julius Caesar, loved Mark Antony, and chose death by snakebite over being paraded through Rome as a conquered prize. These are their stories, and they are beautiful and terrible and human and divine all tangled together. But before we meet them, Before we dive into their individual lives and deaths and legacies, I want to take you through a single day. One day in the life of a pharaoh. From the moment the sun rises to the moment it sets, from the sacred morning rituals to the political machinations, to the lonely evening in a chamber full of servants who see him as anything but human. Because once you understand what it was like, day to day, hour by hour, to be a pharaoh, everything else starts to make sense. The marriages that horrify us, the sacrifices that haunt us, the obsessions that define them, it all makes a kind of terrible, the logical sense when you understand the cage they lived in. So, let's step back in time. Way back. The year is 1500 BCE. The place is Thebes, the heart of the Egyptian empire at its height. The palace is just beginning to wake. Servants are moving through corridors on silent feet. Incense is being lit in the temples. Musicians are taking their places to serenade the sunrise. And somewhere in the center of all this, in a chamber hung with silk and guarded by men who would die for him without question, a young man is sleeping. He's in his 20s, strong, healthy, or at least he appears to be. Tomorrow, he'll be dead, poisoned by someone close to him. But tonight he doesn't know that. Tonight he simply sleeps and dreams. Do gods dream? Do they have nightmares? Do they wake in the dark? Heart pounding, afraid we'll never know. But in a few moments, he'll wake. And when he does, his day will begin. A day like every other day of his reign. A day of ritual and responsibility and crushing. Absolute loneliness. The sun is rising now. The light is touching the tops of the palace walls. The blind musicians begin to play. Soft, gentle, the sound of morning itself. And the pharaoh's eyes open. His day has begun. The performance can start. Let's watch. In the next part of our journey, we'll follow him through that day. We'll see what he sees. Feel what he might feel. Understand why being the most powerful person in the world might also make you the most trapped. We'll witness the rituals, the bathing, the dressing, the prayers, the judgments, the performances, all of it designed to maintain the illusion, to keep the cosmic order, to make sure everyone, including the pharaoh himself, continues to believe in the divine nature of his rule. And slowly, as we watch, we'll start to see the cracks. The moments where the human shows through the god. The fear, the doubt, the desperate loneliness of being worshipped by everyone and truly known by no one. But that's for the next chapter. For now, let the images settle. The golden cage, the impossible burden, the 3,000 years of civilization built on the shoulders of people who were called gods but bled like anyone else. Rest easy. Let the desert sands and ancient mysteries lull you towards sleep. And when you're ready, we'll continue. We'll walk a day in the sandals of a god. We'll discover what it cost. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. If you're finding this relaxing, if it's helping you unwind or drift towards sleep, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like on the video. And if you'd like more content like this, deep dives into history told in a calm and soothing way, please do subscribe. For now, rest, dream of golden deserts and limestone temples and the eternal mystery of the pharaohs who built for forever but couldn't escape the cage of their own divinity. Sleep well. The first sound the pharaoh hears is music. Not an alarm, not a voice. Music, soft and deliberate. The gentle plucking of harp strings, the whisper of a flute, the quiet rhythm of a drum that sounds almost like a heartbeat. The musicians are blind. This is important. This is intentional. Blind musicians can't see the pharaoh in his most vulnerable state, emerging from sleep, before the divine mask is firmly in place. They can't witness the moment when he's just a man, confused and half-dreaming. Reaching for consciousness, they've been waiting outside his chamber for hours, standing in the dark, listening for the change in his breathing that signals he's beginning to wake. They time their music perfectly. It must begin as he transitions from sleep to waking. Not before. Not after. They've practiced this their entire lives. The sound drifts through silk curtains and fills the chamber with something that feels almost like dawn itself. Though the sun hasn't yet touched the palace walls, the pharaoh's eyes open. For just a moment, perhaps half a heartbeat. He's simply a young man waking up. Perhaps he thinks about a dream. Perhaps his body aches from yesterday's ceremonial processions. Perhaps he's thirsty. But that moment passes, because now the servants are entering, barefoot, so their footsteps make only the softest whisper against the cool limestone floor. Their heads are bowed. They don't look at him. They wouldn't dare. Not yet. Not until the rituals have transformed him from sleeping man into waking God. There are 30 of them entering now. 30 people whose only purpose is to prepare him for the day ahead. They've been awake since long before midnight. Preparing themselves, they've bathed. They've purified themselves. They've said their own prayers. Because to touch the pharaoh's body, even in service, even with permission, is to touch the divine. One mistake, one slip, one moment of clumsiness or forgetfulness could mean death. Not metaphorical death. Not the loss of their position. Actual death. Execution. Because errors in the sacred routine could, they all believe, throw the entire universe out of balance. And they've seen it happen before. The head servant, an older man named Ptah-hotep, who has served 3 pharaohs in his lifetime, approaches the sleeping platform. He carries a golden basin filled with water from the Nile. Not just any water. This water was collected at dawn yesterday, blessed by priests, left overnight in the temple to absorb the prayers of the sleeping gods. He kneels beside the pharaoh. The pharaoh sits up. He extends his hands, palm up, as he's been taught since childhood. Always palm up for the morning purification. Never palm down. That would be the gesture for evening. And to confuse the two would be catastrophic. Ptah-hotep pours the water over the pharaoh's hands. The water is cold. The pharaoh doesn't flinch. Gods don't feel discomfort. The water runs down his fingers, drips onto the floor where other servants are already waiting to catch every drop in smaller basins. Nothing can touch the floor. The pharaoh's body is too sacred. Even the water that's touched his skin must be collected, taken to the temple, offered to the gods. While this happens, another servant approaches from behind. Carefully, so carefully, he begins to unwrap the linen that the pharaoh sleeps in. Because even at night, even in sleep, the pharaoh must be wrapped in sanctified cloth. He can't touch ordinary bedding, can't risk contamination from the mundane world. The cloth is removed in a specific order. First, the outer layer, which represents the sky. Then the middle layer, which represents the air. Then the inner layer, which represents earth. Each layer is folded with reverent precision and carried away to be washed in sacred water and dried in sacred smoke and stored for tonight. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is treated casually. Now the pharaoh stands. The room he slept in is enormous. In America, we might think of a presidential bedroom as large, perhaps a few hundred square feet. This chamber could contain a small house. The ceiling disappears into shadows high above. The walls are covered in painted hieroglyphics that tell the story of the sun god's journey through the night, which is, of course, also the pharaoh's journey, because he is the sun god's son. But the chamber is cold. Despite the warm Egyptian climate outside, the massive stone walls hold the night's chill. The pharaoh's breath creates small clouds in the air. His skin prickles with goosebumps. He doesn't acknowledge this. He can't. Gods don't feel cold. The servants form two lines, creating a pathway toward the bathing room. As the pharaoh walks between them, they begin to chant, quietly, rhythmically, words in Old Egyptian that even they don't fully understand anymore. The chant is thousands of years old. It's a spell of protection, a prayer for the day ahead, a reminder to any malevolent spirits that this is sacred ground. The bathing room is warmer. Thankfully, braziers burn in the corners, creating a thick haze of incense that makes the air shimmer. The scent is overwhelming. Myrrh, frankincense, lotus oil, cedar resin. Each one has symbolic meaning. Each one is believed to offer protection against different spiritual dangers. In the center of the room is the bath itself. Not a modern bathtub. This is more like a shallow pool set into the floor. The stone is dark green, carved from a single piece of jade that took craftsmen 3 years to hollow out. The water inside is milky white, clouded with natron salt and perfumed oils. The pharaoh steps into it. The water comes up to his knees. Servants immediately surround the bath. 10 of them, each holding different implements. Brushes made from palm fiber, stones of pumice, cloths of the finest linen, containers of various pastes and oils. And now comes the part that would shock most modern observers. They begin to shave him. Everything. His head, his face, his chest, his arms, his legs. Every single hair on his body must be removed. Because in Egyptian belief, body hair is associated with animals, with the chaotic, untamed, wild. And the pharaoh must be above that. Must be perfectly smooth, perfectly controlled, perfectly unlike ordinary mortals. The process takes nearly an hour. It's not comfortable. The copper razors, even when perfectly sharpened, scrape and burn. The natron salt in the water stings every tiny cut. The pharaoh's skin turns pink, then red. His scalp tingles. His eyes water from the incense smoke. He doesn't complain, doesn't wince, doesn't move except when directed to do so. He's been doing this every single day since he was 7 years old. Since the day his father died and he became pharaoh. For him, this is normal. This is simply what happens. What must happen? When the shaving is complete, new servants approach with new oils. These are the anointing oils. 7 different kinds, applied in a specific order. Each one has been blessed by a different priest in a different temple dedicated to a different god. First, the oil of Ra, golden and thick, rubbed into his scalp where the crown will sit. Second, the oil of Horus, clear as water, massaged into his eyes so he'll see with divine clarity. Third, the oil of Thoth, scented with ibis feathers, applied to his ears so he'll hear the wisdom of the gods. Fourth, the oil of Ptah, mixed with ground lapis lazuli, rubbed into his throat so his words will carry creative power. Fifth, the oil of Anubis, dark and pungent, applied to his chest to protect his heart. Sixth, the oil of Osiris, green with crushed malachite, rubbed into his abdomen to promise resurrection. Seventh, the oil of Seth, the most carefully applied of all because Seth is the god of chaos, rubbed into the soles of his feet so he'll have the strength to walk through disorder without faltering. Each application comes with prayers, chanted by the servants, whispered by the priests who have now entered the room. The air is so thick with incense and steam and the scent of oils that it's hard to breathe. The pharaoh's skin gleams. He looks less like a human now, more like a statue. Something carved and polished and perfect. And they're only halfway through the morning preparations. Now comes the makeup. Because this isn't vanity. This is armor. The kohl for his eyes isn't just decoration. It's ground from galena and malachite, substances believed to have protective properties. The black kohl around his eyes will ward off the evil eye. The green kohl will honor Horus. Together, they'll make his gaze powerful enough to command both men and spirits. A servant, one of the few women allowed in these inner chambers, approaches with a palette and brush. Her hand must be perfectly steady. The lines she draws must be exact. They must extend to his temples in straight, unwavering strokes. They must be symmetrical within a hair's breadth. Last year, a servant's hand shook. The line wavered. She was removed from service immediately. No one knows what happened to her after that. The other servants don't ask. This servant's hand doesn't shake. When she finishes, the pharaoh's eyes are transformed. They look larger, more intense, almost inhuman in their perfection. When he looks at someone, it's not a man looking at them. It's something else. Something that makes them want to fall to their knees. Which is, of course, the point. Now the dressing begins. The pharaoh doesn't dress himself. Of course he doesn't. Each garment is sacred. Each must be put on in the correct order, facing the correct direction, while the correct prayers are recited. First, the linen kilt, pleated so perfectly that each fold is exactly 1 finger width apart, held in place by a belt decorated with gold and carnelian. The belt buckle shows the pharaoh's cartouche, his name written in hieroglyphics inside an oval that represents eternity. Second, the pectoral, a massive collar of gold and lapis lazuli that covers his chest and shoulders. It weighs nearly 10 pounds. The designs on it tell a story in miniature. The pharaoh receiving life and power from the gods. It's so heavy that after a full day of wearing it, his shoulders ache and his neck is stiff. He's been wearing it since he was 7. He'll wear it until he dies. Third, the armbands, gold bands around his biceps, inscribed with spells of protection, gold bracelets around his wrists, each one representing a different nome, a different region of Egypt. 22 bracelets in total. They click and jingle when he moves. Fourth, the sandals. Not ordinary sandals. These have platforms of gold leaf over wood, raising him several inches above the ground, literally elevating him above other mortals. They're uncomfortable. They make walking difficult. But that's acceptable. Gods don't need to move quickly. Fifth, and finally, the crown. There are several crowns, each for different occasions. For this morning's temple ritual, he'll wear the pshent, the double crown, the white crown of Upper Egypt fitted inside the red crown of Lower Egypt. It's made of leather covered in gold leaf, shaped like an impossibly tall cone. It weighs 11 pounds. 2 servants lift it carefully and lower it onto his head. They have to position it exactly right. Too far forward and it will press on his forehead, causing headaches. Too far back and it will overbalance him. They make tiny adjustments, checking from every angle. When they're satisfied, they step back. The pharaoh stands there, transformed. He weighs perhaps 20 pounds more than he did when he woke up. The crown makes his neck ache. The pectoral makes his shoulders burn. The platform sandals make his calves tight. The oils and makeup make his skin itch. It looks magnificent, godlike, untouchable. And the day has only just begun. The high priest enters the chamber. He bows, not as low as the servants, but still deep enough to show respect. He's one of the few people who can look directly at the pharaoh. though even he keeps his gaze slightly lowered. It's time. He says quietly. For the morning offerings. The pharaoh nods. The movement is careful. Too quick, and the crown might shift. He's learned to move slowly. Deliberately. Like every gesture is weighted with cosmic significance. Which, in a way, it is. They proceed to the temple. It's connected to the palace by a covered walkway. The pharaoh walks slowly. Partly because of the platform sandals. Partly because this is a procession, not a walk. Behind him, a trail of servants and priests. In front of him, more priests swinging censers, filling the air with yet more incense. The temple's inner sanctuary is small, surprisingly small. Just a single room, dark except for oil lamps, dominated by a statue of Amun-Ra. The statue is wood covered in gold leaf, with eyes made of lapis lazuli that seem to glow in the lamplight. This is the moment that matters most. This is why all the preparation, all the ritual, all the pain and discomfort and suffocating perfection, because the pharaoh is going to wake the god. In Egyptian belief, the god's spirit inhabits the statue, but each night it sleeps. And each morning, the pharaoh, as the god's son, must wake it, must open the shrine, must present offerings, must recite the correct spells. If he fails, if he forgets the words or performs the gestures wrong, the god might not wake. And if the god doesn't wake, the sun might not rise, the Nile might not flood, the world might simply end. No pressure. The pharaoh approaches the shrine. His hands are shaking slightly. He hides this by clasping them together in front of him. The high priest begins to chant. The other priests join in. The sound echoes in the small space, building and building until it feels like the walls themselves are vibrating. The pharaoh reaches out. He breaks the clay seal on the shrine doors, the seal that was placed there last night to protect the god while it slept. He opens the doors. Inside, the statue stares out at him with those glowing lapis eyes. The pharaoh begins to recite. The words are Old Egyptian, the language of the earliest dynasties. He learned them phonetically as a child. He doesn't know what all of them mean. No one does anymore. But he's memorized them perfectly. Every syllable, every pause, every rise and fall in pitch. He recites for 20 minutes. His voice is steady. He doesn't stumble, doesn't forget, doesn't pause for breath when he shouldn't. When he finishes, there's a moment of profound silence. Then the high priest smiles. The sun is rising. He says, "The god has awakened." The world continues. The pharaoh feels something. Not quite relief. Not quite pride. Maybe just exhaustion. But he doesn't show it. They present the offerings now. Food and drink and flowers. They clothe the statue in fresh linen. They burn more incense. They chant more prayers. It takes another hour. When it's finally done, when they file out of the temple and back toward the palace, the sun is fully up. The day is beginning for everyone else. For the farmers heading to the fields, for the craftsmen opening their workshops, for the merchants setting up their stalls, for them, the day is simple. They have work to do, tasks to complete. For the pharaoh, the morning rituals are complete. Now comes the real work. The governing, the judging, the endless performances of power and divinity. He proceeds to the audience hall, a vast room with columns that rise like stone trees toward a ceiling painted to look like the night sky. At the far end, elevated on a platform, sits his throne, solid gold, carved with images of his victories over chaos, studded with gems that catch the light and throw it back in rainbow patterns. He walks the length of the hall slowly, Every eye is on him. Courtiers, officials, foreign ambassadors. All of them prostrate themselves as he passes. All of them press their foreheads to the floor. He doesn't acknowledge them. Gods don't need to acknowledge worship. He reaches the throne. He sits. The crown is so heavy. The pectoral is cutting into his shoulders. He wants to shift position, to ease the discomfort. But he can't. He must sit perfectly still, perfectly upright, perfectly divine. The vizier approaches. He's an older man, cunning and intelligent. He bows. He begins to read from a scroll. The day's business. Disputes to settle. Trade agreements to approve. Building projects to oversee. Reports from the provinces. News from the borders. The pharaoh listens. He makes decisions. Yes. No. Consider further. Bring me more information. Execute him. Reward her. Build it. Destroy it. His word is law. Absolute. Final. There's no appeal. No higher authority. He is the highest authority. He is the law itself, carved in flesh. But he's also dependent on the information he receives. And he knows, though he can't say it aloud, that his vizier and officials could be lying to him, could be manipulating him, could be plotting against him. Last year, 3 officials were executed for embezzlement. The year before, 5 priests were banished for plotting rebellion. The pharaoh's own uncle was exiled 2 years ago for attempting to poison the wine at a state banquet. Everyone smiles. Everyone bows. Everyone pledges loyalty. And the pharaoh trusts none of them. Hours pass. The business continues. The pharaoh's back aches from sitting so still. His neck throbs from the weight of the crown. His stomach growls with hunger. But he can't eat. Not here. Not in public. Gods don't need food. Not visibly. Finally, as the sun reaches its zenith, the morning session ends. The courtiers file out. The pharaoh is allowed to stand, to move, to return to his private chambers. A meal is waiting. But even this isn't simple. Even this is ritual. The food has been blessed, tasted by servants to ensure it's not poisoned, offered to gods in miniature portions before being presented to him. He eats alone, watched by servants. But they don't see him eating. They see the god consuming offerings. And tomorrow, it will begin again. The musicians, the bathing, the oils, the makeup, the crown, the rituals, the audiences, the performances. Every day, for the rest of his life, the golden cage is comfortable, luxurious beyond measure. But it's still a cage. And there's no key. Now we need to talk about the things that make us uncomfortable. The things that historians sometimes gloss over or explain away with cultural relativism. The things that, even understanding the context, even knowing the religious beliefs, still make us pause and feel something twist in our stomachs. Because the pharaohs didn't just live strange lives. They engaged in practices that, to our modern eyes, seem almost incomprehensible. And yet, to them, these practices made perfect sense. They were logical. They were necessary. They were sacred. Let's start with marriage. In ancient Egypt, the royal family wasn't like other families. They couldn't be, because they weren't just people. They were divine. They carried the blood of the gods flowing through their veins. And that blood, they believed, could not be allowed to mix with ordinary mortal blood. It had to stay pure, perfectly, absolutely pure. So pharaohs married their sisters, not metaphorically, not in some symbolic sense, actually married them, full siblings, born of the same mother and father. They married them, shared beds with them, had children with them. Sometimes they went further. Sometimes a pharaoh would marry his own daughter, or his mother, or his granddaughter, creating family trees that looped back on themselves in ways that make geneticists today wince, just looking at the diagrams. The reasoning was religious. In Egyptian mythology, the god Osiris married his sister Isis. This was the divine template, the perfect example. If the gods did it, then surely the god-king on earth should do the same. It was also political. If pharaohs married outside the family, it created complications. Which family would rise in power? Which relatives would claim influence? Better to keep everything within the immediate royal household. Simpler, cleaner, more controlled. But mostly, it was about purity. About maintaining that unbroken line of divinity stretching back to the first pharaohs, who were believed to be literally descended from Ra himself. The Ptolemaic dynasty took this to extremes that shocked even other Egyptians. For over 200 years, the Ptolemies practiced uninterrupted sibling marriage. Brother married sister. Their children married each other. And so on. Generation after generation. Cleopatra VII, the famous one, the last pharaoh, was the product of at least 3 generations of brother-sister marriages. Her family tree had almost no branches. It was more like a pole, the same names appearing over and over. Ptolemy married to Cleopatra, married to Ptolemy, married to Cleopatra. We have her family's DNA now. We can analyze it. We can see what that inbreeding did. And it's not pretty. Tutankhamun's story is perhaps the most heartbreaking. Modern forensic analysis has revealed that his parents were full siblings. We can see it in his bones, in his teeth, in the structure of his skull. He was born with a clubfoot, a condition that made walking painful and difficult. He needed a cane. Multiple canes. Actually, over 100 walking sticks were found in his tomb. A teenager who couldn't walk without assistance. He had a cleft palate. His jaw was misaligned. His hips were feminized. He suffered from a bone disorder called Koehler disease. His immune system was compromised. And yet, in all the art, in all the statues and paintings, he's depicted as perfect, strong, divine, whole. The cognitive dissonance must have been crushing. To be told you're a god, while your body betrays you with every painful step. He died at 19, probably from malaria, complicated by that weakened immune system, complicated by a broken leg that wouldn't heal, complicated by a lifetime of being, genetically speaking, far less diverse than any human should be. His wife, Antesinamen, was also his half-sister, possibly his full sister. They had 2 children. Both were stillborn. Both were mummified and placed in his tomb. Tiny, perfectly formed babies who never took a breath. Their DNA shows the same markers, the same genetic issues. The family line was eating itself from within. But here's the thing. They didn't know. They couldn't have known. Genetics wouldn't be understood for thousands of years. To them, these health problems were just bad luck. Curses. Maybe displeasure from the gods. They never connected it to the marriages. Never realized that what they were doing to preserve purity was actually destroying it. And even if someone had suggested it, even if some ancient Egyptian geneticist had somehow understood, would they have stopped? Could they have stopped? The entire foundation of pharaonic power rested on divine purity. To admit that the practice was harmful would be to admit that the pharaohs weren't divine after all. The golden cage had genetic bars too. Invisible but just as imprisoning. Now let's talk about death. Not just the pharaoh's death. The deaths that surrounded it. The deaths that were required for it. In the earliest dynasties, when a pharaoh died, He didn't go to the afterlife alone. His servants went with him. Not willingly, not metaphorically. They were killed, deliberately, ritually, to serve their master in the world beyond. The archaeological evidence is clear and chilling. Around the tombs of First Dynasty pharaohs, we find subsidiary burials. Dozens of them. Sometimes hundreds, bodies arranged in neat rows. Like soldiers on parade. Like servants waiting for orders that will never come. The tomb of Jir, one of the earliest pharaohs, contained 318 subsidiary burials. 318 people. Men. Women. Some, possibly even children. All killed when the pharaoh died. How were they killed? The evidence varies. Some skeletons show signs of strangulation. Marks on the neck bones consistent with rope or wire tightening until breath stopped. Some show blunt force trauma to the skull. Quick deaths. Probably. Efficient. A blow from behind. Unexpected. And it's over. Some show no obvious cause of death, which might mean poison. A cup of wine, laced with something that made them drowsy, then stopped their hearts. Perhaps that was considered merciful. Perhaps it was reserved for the favored ones. Were they volunteers? Did they believe it was an honor to die with their pharaoh? Some might have. Religious indoctrination is powerful. If you're raised from childhood to believe that serving the pharaoh is the highest purpose, that dying with him means eternal glory, then maybe you'd go willingly. But 318 people, all volunteers, all true believers, probably not. More likely, some were volunteers and some were selected. Chosen. Told they had the honor of accompanying the God King into eternity. Told they should be grateful. What do you do in that situation? Do you run? Where would you go? This is Egypt. The pharaoh's reach extends to every corner of the kingdom. Do you plead, to whom the pharaoh is dead? The priests are conducting the rituals. The decision has been made. Do you accept? Convince yourself it's an honor. Pray that the afterlife is real. That you'll serve in golden halls instead of just ceasing to exist. We'll never know what they thought. What they felt? We only know they died. And they were buried in the positions they'd held in life. Servants crouched as if still ready to serve. Guards standing at attention. Concubines arranged as if asleep. Frozen in service forever. This practice faded over time. By the end of the Old Kingdom, by the time the Great Pyramids were being built, human sacrifice had mostly stopped. They'd found other ways. Shabti figurines, small statues placed in the tomb that were believed to magically come to life in the afterlife and perform labor for the deceased. Much more convenient. No one had to die. Just carve a few hundred wooden servants and you're set for eternity. But the psychological damage was done. The precedent was set. The pharaoh's life, the pharaoh's comfort, the pharaoh's eternity was worth any price, any number of other lives. Because he wasn't just a life, he was the life, the embodiment of everything that kept the universe functioning. What's 318 servants compared to cosmic order? And even after human sacrifice ended, the obsession with death continued, deepened, actually, became more elaborate, more consuming, because death, for a pharaoh, wasn't an end. It was a transformation, a promotion. Really, in life, the pharaoh was a god trapped in flesh. In death, he would be fully divine. He would join Ra in the solar boat. He would travel across the sky by day and through the underworld by night. Forever. But to achieve that, everything had to be perfect. The body had to be preserved. The tomb had to be properly equipped. The rituals had to be performed without error. Miss one step and you might not make it. Might be devoured by demons in the underworld. Might simply cease to exist. So from the moment a pharaoh took the throne, he began planning for his death. Not in secret, not morbidly, openly, practically. His tomb was one of his most important building projects. Often the most important. More resources went into preparing for death than for anything else. The Great Pyramid of Khufu. Let's really consider it for a moment. 2.3 million blocks of limestone. Each block weighing, on average, 2.5 tons. Some weighing as much as 15 tons. Quarried, transported, lifted into place with nothing but human muscle. Wooden rollers, copper tools, and geometric precision. It took 20 to 27 years to build. Longer than most modern skyscrapers. Longer than most modern monuments. This was one man's tomb. One man's stairway to heaven. The human cost was staggering. 20,000 workers at minimum. Possibly as many as 100,000. Rotating in shifts during the flood season when farm work was impossible. They weren't technically slaves. We know this now. They were paid. Given food, beer, bread. There was a workers' village with its own bakeries and breweries. A cemetery for workers who died during construction. And many did die. The skeletons tell the story. Crushed vertebrae from carrying heavy loads. Amputated limbs from accidents. Arthritis that set in absurdly young from constant, backbreaking labor. Signs of malnutrition despite the rations. They were fed enough to work, not necessarily enough to thrive. And for what so that Khufu's soul would have a perfect vehicle for ascending to the stars, so that his Ka, his life force, would have a permanent home to return to, so that he could be immortal. Was it worth it? 20,000 lives spent, in various degrees, to preserve one. The pharaohs thought so, had to think so, because if it wasn't worth it, if all that suffering served no purpose, then what were they? Just men, just mortal, just going to die and disappear like everyone else. Unacceptably. Better to believe, better to build, better to pour everything into that quest for eternal life, no matter the cost to others. And the preparation didn't stop at the tomb. The body itself had to be prepared, preserved, made eternal. Mummification. It's become almost quaint in popular culture. Halloween decorations, cartoon monsters. But the reality of it is something else entirely. The process took 70 days. 70 days of carefully controlled decomposition and preservation. First, the body was taken to the embalmer's workshop. This was near the necropolis, the city of the dead, away from the living areas. Because death is unclean, the embalmers themselves were considered impure. Outcasts. Necessary, but tainted. They wore masks. Jackal masks, representing Anubis, the god of embalming, partly for religious reasons, partly, one suspects, to filter the smell. Because, despite what movies suggest, mummification isn't a clean process. The body begins to decompose immediately after death. Within hours, the embalmers had to work quickly. First, they removed the brain. They did this by inserting a long hook up through the nose, breaking through the ethmoid bone, and then, essentially, scrambling the brain tissue, turning it liquid. Then they'd turn the body face down and let it drain out through the nostrils. The brain wasn't considered important. They didn't know what it did. They thought consciousness resided in the heart. Next, they made an incision in the left side of the abdomen, reached inside, removed the stomach, intestines, lungs, and liver. These were important. These were preserved separately, placed in canopic jars, each protected by a different god. The heart stayed in the body. It would be needed in the afterlife. It would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. Truth and justice. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the deceased could enter paradise. If heavier, it would be devoured by Amit, the soul-eating demon. No pressure. With the organs removed, the body cavity was washed with palm wine and filled with natron, a naturally occurring salt. The body was then covered entirely in natron and left for 40 days. The natron drew out all the moisture, completely desiccated the flesh. What remained was leathery, darkened, barely recognizable as human, but preserved. That's what mattered. After 40 days, the natron was removed. The body was washed again. The cavity was packed with linen, resin, sawdust, whatever would give it shape again, make it look more lifelike. Then the wrapping began, layer after layer of linen bandages, each layer anointed with oils, each layer accompanied by prayers and spells. Between the layers, amulets were placed, sacred objects meant to protect the deceased on their journey. Scarabs, eyes of Horus, jed pillars representing stability. The face was covered with a mask. For important people, for pharaohs, this mask was gold. A perfect, idealized face, forever young, forever beautiful, forever divine. The finished mummy barely looked human. It looked like an artifact, like an object, which, in a sense, it was a vessel, a carefully prepared container for the soul's return. But underneath all those wrappings was a person. Someone who'd laughed, who'd been afraid, who'd loved and been loved, who'd lived and died and been transformed into this thing. The first time you see a real mummy, not in a movie but in a museum, standing close enough to see the details, it's unsettling. Because you can see where they were human. You can see the outline of bones under the wrappings. Sometimes actual skin visible through gaps. Sometimes hair. Sometimes fingernails. And you realize this was someone. This was real. 3,000 years ago. This was a pharaoh. Worshipped as a god. Commanding armies. Judging nations. Surrounded by luxury and power. Now they're in a climate-controlled case. Under glass. Stared at by tourists eating ice cream. Is this the immortality they wanted? Being a curiosity, an artifact, a Halloween decoration, or would they rather have been forgotten entirely? Allowed to rest in peace in their hidden tombs? We'll never know. We can't ask them. We can only look at what they left behind. The tombs filled with treasures. The thousands of objects buried with them. Food and wine and furniture and clothes and games and weapons and jewelry and everything. Absolutely everything they might need in the afterlife. Tutankhamun's small tomb contained over 5,000 objects. 5,000. And his tomb was tiny. Hastily prepared. Because he died unexpectedly young. Imagine what the tomb of Ramesses II must have contained. Or Khufu's. We'll never know. Those tombs were robbed thousands of years ago. Stripped. Violated. The immortality they'd paid so dearly for. Stolen by common thieves looking for gold. Maybe that's the real lesson. The real disturbing truth at the heart of all this. You can't buy immortality. Can't build it. Can't marry for it. Can't sacrifice for it. Can't mummify your way into it. The pharaohs tried everything. Gave up their freedom, their health, their humanity, sacrificed thousands of others, poured entire nations' worth of resources into monuments and tombs and rituals. And in the end, they died anyway, turned to dust anyway, were forgotten anyway, until archaeologists dug them up and put them in museums. Is that immortality being remembered? But not in the way you intended. Being famous? But as a cautionary tale, having your name known, but your life misunderstood. The pharaohs disturb us not because they were monsters. They disturb us because they were human. Because they wanted what we want. To matter. To be remembered. To somehow escape the inevitable. And because they had the power to pursue that want to its logical, terrible extreme. They show us what happens when one person has too much power. When one person's desires outweigh everyone else's lives. When the quest for immortality becomes more important than the value of mortality. They built monuments that lasted thousands of years. But they also built cages. For themselves, for their families, for their people. Golden cages. But cages nonetheless. And now, having seen the darkness, having confronted the disturbing realities of these divine lives, we need to meet them as individuals, not as abstract pharaohs, but as specific people who lived these impossible lives and left their marks on history. Some of them tried to be good within the system. Some tried to break it. Some embraced its worst aspects. Some were victims of it. Some were monsters. Some were heroes. Most were both. Let's meet them now. Let's see their faces, hear their stories, understand their choices. Let's see what happens when humans try to be gods. Now let's meet them, not as distant figures carved in stone, but as people, complicated people who made choices, good and terrible, within the impossible constraints of their golden cages. We'll start with someone who refused to accept the bars at all. Her name was Hatshepsut. She was born into royalty, daughter of Thutmose I. She married her half-brother, Thutmose II. As was expected, when he died young, his son from another wife, still a child, was next in line. Thutmose III. Her stepson, Hatshepsut, became regent. This was normal. This was acceptable. A woman could guide a child pharaoh until he came of age. That happened sometimes. It wasn't unprecedented. But then Hatshepsut did something that was unprecedented. She declared herself pharaoh. Not regent. Not queen. Pharaoh. King. The living Horus. The son of Ra. All the titles that had only ever belonged to men. She didn't just claim the title. She transformed herself to fit it. In statues and carvings, she had herself depicted with the false beard that pharaohs wore, with a bare, muscular chest, with the full regalia of kingship. She even changed the pronouns used to describe her in official texts. From she to he, from queen to king. Think about what that took. The audacity of it. The sheer force of will required to look at 3,000 years of tradition and say, "No, I will be different. I will be king." And she was good at it. Her reign lasted over 20 years. 20 years of peace and prosperity. She didn't focus on military conquest like most pharaohs. She focused on trade, on architecture, on making Egypt wealthy rather than just powerful. She sent trading expeditions to Punt, a mysterious land to the south, probably modern-day Somalia or Ethiopia. They brought back gold, ebony, myrrh, live myrrh trees, which was extraordinary. She had the whole expedition documented in detailed reliefs on her mortuary temple. That temple, Deser Deseru, is one of the most beautiful structures in Egypt, built into the cliffs at Deir el-Bahari, rising in elegant terraces, columns so perfectly proportioned they seem to float. It's still standing today, still breathtaking. She built monuments throughout Egypt. She restored temples that had fallen into disrepair. She strengthened Egypt's economy. By all accounts, she was a successful pharaoh. But after she died, her stepson did something cruel. Thutmose III. Finally, sole ruler, after decades of waiting, ordered her name erased, her images defaced, Her statues smashed. He tried to write her out of history entirely. Was it personal resentment, anger at being kept from power for so long, or was it something else? Was it the need to restore proper order? To erase the anomaly of a woman king? To make it as if she'd never existed? We don't know his reasoning. We only know what he did. For 3,000 years, it worked. Hatshepsut was forgotten. Her name lost. Her achievements attributed to others. Until archaeologists started piecing together the clues. Seeing the erasures. Finding the hidden statues. Realizing that the gaps in the historical record concealed someone important. Now we know her name. We've even found her mummy. Identified through DNA testing. She died in her 50s. Probably from cancer. Judging by the bone lesions, she was buried in an unmarked tomb. Hidden away. Protected by priests who remembered, even if official history didn't. She achieved a kind of immortality. Not the kind she planned. Not through her monuments. Though they survived. Through her audacity. Through being the woman who looked at an impossible barrier and simply stepped through it. In America, we like to think we're progressive. We like to think we're ahead of the curve on equality. But Egypt had a female pharaoh 3,400 years ago. And the patriarchy tried to erase her from existence for it. Some things, it seems, are universal. Now let's talk about a different kind of rebel. His name was Amenhotep IV. But he changed it. Changed it to Akhenaten. Devoted to Aten. Devoted to the sun disk. Devoted to the one god he decided was the only god that mattered. In a civilization with thousands of gods, with temples to Amun and Ra and Osiris and Horus and Hathor and Thoth and Anubis and dozens more. Akhenaten said no. There is only one God. Only Aten. Only the sun itself. And I am the only one who can speak to it. The audacity of this is hard to overstate. The Amun priesthood was one of the most powerful institutions in Egypt. They controlled vast wealth. They had political influence. They were intermediaries between the people and the divine. And Akhenaten just fired them, closed their temples, confiscated their property, declared their gods false, moved the capital to a new city in the middle of nowhere. A city dedicated entirely to Aten. He called it Akhetaten, the horizon of Aten. We call it Amarna today. Why did he do this? Was it genuine religious vision? Was he a mystic who genuinely believed he'd seen the truth? Or was it political, a power play to break the priesthood's influence? Or was it madness? Because there's something strange about Akhenaten, something that shows in every depiction of him. He didn't look like other pharaohs. Other pharaohs were shown as strong, perfect, idealized, athletic bodies, handsome faces, divine proportion. Akhenaten was shown with an elongated skull, wide hips, a protruding belly, an unusually long face, almost alien features. Was this accurate? Did he actually look like this, or was it some kind of artistic statement, showing his divine androgyny, his transcendence of normal human categories? Some scholars think he had Marfan syndrome, a genetic disorder that causes elongated limbs and skeletal abnormalities. Others think it's just stylistic, the Amarna art style that he commissioned. We don't know. His mummy has never been definitively identified. What we do know is that he was devoted to his wife, Nefertiti, the most beautiful woman in Egypt. Maybe the most beautiful woman in the world. If we believe the famous limestone bust that survived, they're shown together constantly in the art of Amarna, holding hands, embracing, playing with their 6 daughters. It's shockingly intimate, shockingly personal for royal art. Most pharaohs were shown distant, formal, divine. Akhenaten and Nefertiti are shown as a couple in love. But then Nefertiti disappears from the record. Just vanishes. Around year 14 of Akhenaten's reign. She's gone. Did she die, fall from favor, take a different name and rule as co-regent? Some evidence suggests that after Nefertiti disappeared, Akhenaten married one of his daughters, Ankhesenamun, the daughter who would later marry Tutankhamun, his son, possibly also his grandson. The genetics of this are nightmare fuel. And while Akhenaten was conducting his religious revolution, Egypt was falling apart. He was so focused on Aten that he ignored everything else. Military dispatches went unanswered. Territories were lost. The economy suffered. The people were confused, angry, lost without their traditional gods. When Akhenaten died, around age 40, his son inherited a mess. That son was a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old. His name was Tutankhaten, devoted to Aten. Within a few years, pressured by advisors, by priests, by the weight of a collapsing nation, the boy changed his name to Tutankhamun, devoted to Amun, the old god, the traditional god. The Amarna experiment ended. The city was abandoned. Akhenaten's name was struck from the king lists. He became the heretic, the criminal, the one who nearly destroyed Egypt. And yet, the hymn to Aten that Akhenaten wrote is beautiful, genuinely beautiful. It rivals the biblical psalms in its poetry, its wonder at creation, its sense of divine presence in everything. Some scholars see echoes of it in Psalm 104. Wonder if, maybe, Akhenaten's monotheism influenced early Hebrew thought. Wonder if this madman, this heretic, this failed pharaoh, might have inadvertently helped birth the religious traditions that would eventually dominate the world. We'll never know. What we know is that he tried to break free, tried to change everything, and failed, and was forgotten, until we dug up his city and remembered him again. The boy who became Tutankhamun, who tried to clean up the mess, didn't fare much better. We've talked about him already, about his genetic disasters, his clubfoot, his pain, but let's sit with his story a little longer, because Tutankhamun is the most famous pharaoh in the world. And it's such a strange fame. He didn't do anything remarkable. He didn't build great monuments. He didn't win decisive battles. He didn't rule for long. He died at 19, having spent most of his reign as a puppet for his advisors. He's famous because he was forgotten, because his tomb, small and hastily prepared, was hidden in the Valley of the Kings beneath the rubble from a later tomb, because grave robbers missed it, because it survived, miraculously intact, for 3,200 years. In 1922, Howard Carter found it, spent nearly a decade excavating it, cataloged over 5,000 objects. The golden mask, the nested coffins, the throne, the chariots, the beds, the clothes, the jewelry, the food, the wine, the games, the shrines, the statues, all of it preserved, all of it showing us, for the first time, exactly how a pharaoh was buried. When Carter first peered through the hole in the sealed door, holding up a candle, Lord Carnarvon behind him asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter's reply has become famous. Yes. Wonderful things. Wonderful things. For a boy who suffered, who struggled, who never got to be just a kid, who carried the weight of an empire while his bones ached and his body failed him. His tomb shows us how much they tried to give him in death that he couldn't have in life. Comfort, wholeness, eternity. The mummy shows us what they couldn't give him. His body was damaged during mummification. His chest was crushed. His heart is missing. His penis was mummified separately. at an angle that suggests some kind of fertility ritual. Even in death, he couldn't just rest. He had to be perfect, had to be prepared for eternity. His 2 stillborn daughters were mummified and buried with him. Tiny things. Never got to live. Never got names. Really. Just identifiers. Daughter 1. Daughter 2. The family line ended with him. All that divine blood, all that genetic purity, it produced a boy who couldn't walk right, couldn't father healthy children, couldn't survive past his teenage years. The golden cage crushed him. Genetically, politically, spiritually, and then made him the most famous pharaoh in history for it. There's a bitter irony in that. Now let's meet someone who seemed to love his cage, who decorated it, who filled it with mirrors so he could admire himself from every angle. Ramesses II. Ramesses the Great, or, depending on your perspective, Ramesses the Narcissist. He ruled for 66 years. Think about that. 66 years. Longer than most people live. Even today, he outlived many of his own children, fathered over 100 of them, with multiple wives and concubines, and he spent those 66 years building and carving his name, his face, his accomplishments, his divine greatness. Abu Simbel, 4 colossal statues of Ramesses, each 67 feet tall, carved into a cliff face, sitting in judgment forever, staring across the desert, proclaiming his power. Inside, more Ramesses. Everywhere Ramesses. Even the small statue of Nefertari, his beloved wife, only comes up to his knee in the carvings. The Ramesseum, his mortuary temple, dominated by a fallen colossus that once stood 60 feet tall. A statue of Ramesses so large that Shelley wrote a poem about it. Ozymandias, look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Except the mighty statue is broken, lying in pieces, the face half buried in sand. A warning about hubris, about the impermanence of human glory. Ramesses wouldn't have cared. He built it to last forever. The fact that it fell just proves that forever is longer than stone. He also had a habit of usurping other pharaohs' monuments. See a statue, chisel off the original name. Carve in Ramesses. See a temple, add your cartouche everywhere. Make it yours. He did this so extensively that for a long time, archaeologists thought he'd built more than any other pharaoh. Then they started looking closer, started finding the erased names underneath, started realizing that Ramesses was taking credit for others' work. He even did it to his own father's monuments. Seti I, who'd actually been a great builder and warrior. Ramesses took credit for his accomplishments too. But Ramesses wasn't just about monuments. He fought wars. Most famously, the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites. According to Ramesses' account, carved on practically every temple wall in Egypt, it was the greatest military victory in history. He, personally, single-handedly, turned the tide of battle, charged into the enemy army alone, killed thousands, secured total victory. According to the Hittite account, which still exists, it was basically a draw. Both sides retreated. Both sides claimed victory. Eventually, they signed a peace treaty as equals. But in Egypt, Ramesses made sure everyone knew he was the victor, the warrior, the savior of Egypt. He even had the story carved on his mummy wrappings. Just in case the gods forgot, his mummy is in the Cairo Museum now. You can see his face, strong features, long nose, red hair, preserved after 3,000 years. The hair of a god. He died in his 90s. Old, worn out, his body finally giving up after nearly a century of use. His teeth were abscessed, his arthritis severe. He was probably in constant pain toward the end. But he got what he wanted. Immortality. We're still talking about him. Still impressed by his monuments. Still teaching about him in schools? Does it matter that he was a narcissist, that he stole credit? That he may have been a mediocre warrior, inflating his own legend? He won. He's remembered. He's Ramesses the Great. The Golden Cage's greatest success story. The prisoner who convinced himself he was free. Finally, let's talk about the last pharaoh. Cleopatra the Seventh. She wasn't Egyptian. Not ethnically. She was Ptolemaic. Greek. Macedonian. The product of generations of Greek rulers who'd taken over after Alexander the Great conquered Egypt. And the product of generations of incest. Brother-sister marriages. Uncle-niece marriages. All in the name of keeping power in the family. But Cleopatra was brilliant. Spoke 9 languages, including Egyptian, which her ancestors had refused to learn. She was educated in rhetoric, philosophy, astronomy, mathematics. She understood politics. She understood power. She also understood that Egypt was no longer the dominant power. Rome was rising. Egypt was wealthy, but weak. She needed Rome's protection. So she seduced Julius Caesar. Not with looks? Probably. The coins show her with a rather prominent nose. A strong chin. Not the Hollywood beauty we imagine. But with intelligence, with charm, with political savvy, she made herself indispensable to him. Had his child. Caesarion. Positioned herself as his partner in the East while he ruled the West. When Caesar was assassinated, she pivoted, aligned with Mark Antony, seduced him too. Though this time, maybe, it was more than politics. Maybe they actually loved each other. They certainly put on a good show. Lavish parties, public displays of affection. Antony giving her Roman territories as gifts, declaring her and Caesarion rulers of the East. Rome didn't like this. Octavian, Caesar's heir, didn't like this. He declared war. The Battle of Actium, 31 BCE. Cleopatra and Antony's combined forces against Octavian's navy. They lost. Antony fled back to Egypt with Cleopatra. Octavian followed, defeated them again. Antony committed suicide, fell on his sword, died in Cleopatra's arms. According to the legend, Cleopatra was captured. Octavian planned to parade her through Rome in chains, display her as a conquered queen. A warning to anyone who opposed Rome. Cleopatra chose differently. The story says she smuggled an asp, a cobra, into her chambers. Let it bite her. Died from the venom. Maybe, or maybe it was poison. A quick-acting toxin hidden in a hairpin or a ring. We'll never know. What we know is she died on her own terms. Denied Octavian his triumph. Denied Rome its prisoner. Took control of the one thing she had left. Her death. She was 39 years old. With her death, the age of pharaohs ended. Egypt became a Roman province. The temples were neglected. The old gods forgotten. 3,000 years of civilization. Over. But Cleopatra won her immortality too. Not through monuments. Through story. Through legend. Through becoming a symbol of doomed love. Dangerous beauty. Female power. Shakespeare wrote about her. Hollywood made her into a spectacle. Her name is known worldwide. The last pharaoh. The last one in the golden cage. And she chose to die free rather than live imprisoned. Maybe that's the most fitting end to their story. These 5 pharaohs, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Ramesses, Cleopatra, different in almost every way. different times, different challenges, different choices, but all trapped in the same golden cage, all struggling with the same impossible burden, all human beneath the divine masks. Some tried to break free. Some decorated their prison. Some were broken by it. Some made it work for them. Some chose death over imprisonment. But all of them, every single one, wanted the same thing: to be remembered, to matter, to somehow transcend death and live forever. And in that, at least, they succeeded. We remember them. We tell their stories. We stand before their monuments and their mummies and feel something: awe, wonder, perhaps a little fear. They've been dead for thousands of years. But they're not gone. They're still here. Still speaking to us. Still teaching us about power and humanity and the price of divinity. The golden cage couldn't hold them forever after all. So, what have we learned? Traveling through these golden cages. Walking beside these god kings. Witnessing their triumphs and their failures. Perhaps the most striking thing is the paradoxes. The contradictions that defined every aspect of their lives. Unlimited power, but zero freedom. They could order anyone's death with a word. But they couldn't choose what to eat for breakfast. They commanded armies but couldn't walk through their own palace without an entourage. They had hundreds of servants but not a single friend. Worshipped as gods but utterly alone. Everyone bowed before them. But no one truly saw them. They were surrounded by people every moment of every day. Yet they lived in a loneliness more profound than any hermit in the desert. Because loneliness isn't about being physically alone. It's about being unseen, unknown, misunderstood. And how can anyone understand a God obsessed with immortality but terrified of death? They spent more resources preparing for death than living life. The bigger the tomb, the bigger the fear behind it. The more elaborate the mummification, the more desperate the hope. They were running from death while simultaneously planning for it, building monuments to it, making it the central focus of their entire existence. Divine status, but human frailty. They were called gods, but they got sick like anyone else. They broke bones. They suffered genetic disorders from inbreeding. They aged. Their teeth rotted. Their joints ached. The divine mask never quite covered the human face beneath. And perhaps the cruelest paradox of all, they built for eternity but were forgotten anyway. The pyramids stood for thousands of years. But the pharaohs who built them faded from memory. Their names were lost. Their tombs were robbed. Their mummies were scattered. The immortality they'd sacrificed everything for came in a form they never expected. Not through their monuments, but through our curiosity. Not through worship, but through archaeology. In America, we have a saying: it's lonely at the top, but we can't really imagine how lonely. Our presidents serve 4 or 8 years. Then they get to be regular people again. They write memoirs. They give speeches. They're free. The pharaohs were never free. From the moment they were born into royalty, they were trapped. And if they became pharaoh, the cage locked forever. No escape, no retirement, no moment of just being human. Until death. And even then, even in death, they had obligations, rituals to perform, judges to face, a journey through the underworld where demons waited to devour them if they made one wrong step, forever performing, forever divine, forever imprisoned. And yet, for all that, they were still people, still human beneath the gold and the makeup and the heavy crowns. They still felt fear. They still wanted love. They still hoped for something beyond the next day. The next year, the next ritual. Some of them tried to be good, tried to use their impossible power wisely, tried to make Egypt prosper. Some of them broke under the pressure. became paranoid, became cruel, became the monsters their enemies always said they were. And some of them tried to break free entirely, tried to change the system, tried to be something other than what thousands of years of tradition demanded. They all failed in different ways, or succeeded in ways they never intended. The mysteries continue. Even now, thousands of years later, modern archaeology keeps revealing new secrets. DNA analysis shows us family relationships, tells us who was whose child, whose sibling, whose parent, confirms the incest we suspected, shows us the genetic damage it caused. CT scans let us look inside mummies without unwrapping them. We can see their injuries, their diseases, the ways they died. Tutankhamun's clubfoot, Ramesses' arthritis, the malaria parasites still detectable in ancient blood. Chemical analysis of their teeth and bones tells us what they ate, where they grew up, where they traveled. We can trace trade routes through the minerals in their bodies. And we keep finding new tombs, new mummies, new artifacts, each one teaching us something we didn't know. In 2007, they identified Hatshepsut's mummy through DNA matching and a tooth found in a canopic jar. We can look at her face now. See the woman who declared herself king. In 2010, DNA testing confirmed that Tutankhamun's parents were full siblings, gave us the genetic proof of what killed him. In 2012, new research on Ramesses III's mummy revealed that he was murdered. His throat was cut. The conspiracy theories recorded in ancient texts were true. In 2015, some archaeologists claimed they'd found evidence of hidden chambers in Tutankhamun's tomb, possibly Nefertiti's burial chamber, sealed behind a false wall. The jury's still out on that one. The mystery continues. And that's fitting. Somehow, the pharaohs wanted to be mysterious, wanted to be beyond human understanding, wanted to be unknowable gods. They succeeded, but not in the way they planned. We understand more about them now than anyone has for 3,000 years. But we still don't fully understand them. Can't fully grasp what it was like to live in those cages. Can't fully comprehend the weight of being divine. We can only look at the evidence, make our guesses, tell their stories as best we can, and wonder, always wonder, where is Nefertiti's mummy? What really happened to Akhenaten? How were the pyramids really built? What secrets are still buried under the sand, waiting for someone to find them? The pharaohs keep their secrets even now, even in death, even with all our technology and our science and our curiosity. Maybe they're having the last laugh after all. So what do these ancient god kings teach us? What can we learn from their golden cages and their desperate quests for immortality? First, perhaps, that power doesn't equal happiness. The pharaohs had more power than anyone alive, more power than most people in history. They could do anything, command anything, take anything, and many of them were miserable, paranoid, trapped, performing constantly, never able to rest, never able to be real. In our modern world, we often think that if we just had more power, more control, more money, more influence, we'd be happy. The pharaohs suggest otherwise. They had everything, and it wasn't enough, couldn't be enough, because the human heart needs things that power can't provide. Genuine connection, understanding, freedom to be imperfect. Second, that immortality comes through story, not monuments. The pyramids are impressive, genuinely awe-inspiring. But we don't remember Khufu because of his pyramid. We remember him because of the story, the ambition, the audacity, the human will to build something that touches the sky. We remember Cleopatra not because of her monuments, most of which are lost or destroyed, but because of her choices, her intelligence, her doomed love, her defiant death. We remember Tutankhamun not because of his reign, which was brief and uneventful, but because of his tragic life, his pain, his beautiful tomb, his golden mask. The stories last longer than the stone. Third, that trying to control everything means losing control. The more rituals the pharaohs created, the more anxious they became. The more they tried to ensure the perfect outcome, the more things could go wrong. Akhenaten tried to control Egypt's entire religious life. It collapsed around him. In our modern lives, we try to control things too. Plan everything. Schedule everything. Optimize everything. The pharaohs suggest that maybe, just maybe, that's not the path to peace. Fourth, that what we're born into shapes us but doesn't have to define us. Hatshepsut was born a woman in a world that said women couldn't be pharaohs. She became one anyway. Akhenaten was born into a world of many gods. He chose one god, even trapped in their roles, even imprisoned by tradition. Humans find ways to choose, to rebel, to be themselves. We're not so different. We're born into families, cultures, expectations. We can accept them entirely, or we can push back, find our own paths, make our own choices. The cage is real, but it's not necessarily locked. And fifth, perhaps most importantly, that death comes for everyone, rich or poor, powerful or powerless, god or mortal. The pharaohs spent their entire lives, spent their entire civilization's resources, trying to escape death or at least make it comfortable. And they all died anyway, turned to dust anyway. Their bodies decayed despite the mummification. Their tombs were robbed despite the precautions. Their names were forgotten despite the monuments. Until we dug them up again. Until we remembered them again. Until we started telling their stories again. And that's the strange, beautiful irony. They achieved immortality, just not the way they expected. They live on, not in the afterlife they prepared for so carefully, but in our imagination, in our museums, in our stories. Every time we tell their tales, they live again. Every time we look at their artifacts, they touch us across the millennia. Every time we wonder about their lives, they're present. The pharaohs disturb us because they show us ourselves, our own fears of death, our own desire to matter, our own loneliness in a world of billions, our own cages, perhaps not made of gold, but just as real. They were human, gloriously, terribly, beautifully human. Capable of great achievements and great cruelty, of wisdom and madness, of love and paranoia. Just like us. The difference is that they had the power to act on those impulses without limit, to build monuments to their egos, to sacrifice others for their fears, to reshape civilization around their obsessions. And that's what makes them disturbing. Not that they were different from us, but that they were the same. Just with fewer constraints, fewer consequences, more power to be the fullest version of themselves, for better and for worse. Why can't we stop thinking about them? Why do the pharaohs still fascinate us after 3,000 years? Perhaps it's the aesthetic, the gold, the hieroglyphics that look like art, the massive monuments that make us feel small, the mystery of a civilization that seemed to understand something about eternity that we've lost. Perhaps it's the timescale. 3,000 years of continuous civilization. Longer than Christianity. Longer than Islam. Longer than any modern nation-state. It makes our lives feel brief by comparison. Makes us want to reach backward. To touch something that endured. Perhaps it's the contradiction. Brutal and beautiful. Oppressive and artistic. Scientific and superstitious. They contain multitudes. They refuse to be simple. Perhaps it's that we can see their faces. The mummies make it real. We can stand before Ramesses II in the Cairo Museum and look at his actual face. His skin. His hair. We can see the person, not just the idea of the person. The actual human being who lived and breathed and died. It's the ultimate time travel. The ultimate confrontation with mortality. We look at them and see ourselves. Temporary. Fragile. Desperately wanting to matter. And in that moment, the pharaohs win. Because they wanted to be remembered. And we remember. So as you drift towards sleep tonight, let yourself imagine for a moment. Not being a pharaoh. Not having that impossible power and that unbearable loneliness. But imagine being someone who has walked through their world and emerged on the other side. Someone who has seen the golden cages and understood them. Someone who has learned from their mistakes. Someone who knows. Now, what matters? You've seen their triumphs and their tragedies. Their achievements and their cruelty. Their humanity beneath their divinity. And maybe, just maybe, you've learned something about your own life, your own fears, your own desires for immortality and significance. The pharaohs built pyramids. They built monuments. They built elaborate tombs and filled them with gold. But you don't need to build pyramids to matter. You don't need gold to be remembered. You don't need divine status to be significant. You just need to be human. Genuinely, fully, imperfectly human. To love and be loved. To create something, anything, that touches others. To be kind when you have power over others. To be brave when the cage seems locked. The pharaohs were trapped by their divinity. You're free by your mortality. You can make mistakes. You can change. You can choose differently tomorrow than you chose today. That's a gift the pharaohs never had. So rest now. Let the images of golden deserts and ancient temples fade. Let the weight of their stories settle like sand. Let the mysteries remain mysterious for now. The pharaohs sleep in their museums and their tombs. They've been sleeping for thousands of years. They'll sleep for thousands more. But you are alive, right now, in this moment, free in ways they never were, unburdened by divine expectations, unperfected, unfinished, beautifully, wonderfully human. Sleep well. Dream of golden pyramids if you like. Dream of limestone temples and painted hieroglyphics. Dream of the eternal mysteries. But wake up grateful for your small, brief, perfectly ordinary life. Because that's something even the mightiest pharaoh would have envied. The freedom to simply be. Good night.